So I think any good game reviewer or content creator on this platform that values their work and wants to do the best they possibly can have probably done this at some point. You've got games that you're passionate about and you want to express that passion through your work, but you don't want to blow your load on a specific game that means a lot to you and end up regretting the quality of the episode. When I first started this journey, I made a list of games that I knew I wanted to talk about, but I was to not touch them whatsoever until I felt I reached a specific point. And for myself, that was the quality of my reviews, where I felt comfortable enough that when I was done, I'd be happy with the results and be proud of it. And on that list, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 stood at the top, right beside another Genesis game, which we'll get to that someday, but not quite yet. So, Sonic 2. You were my gateway into video games. The very first title I ever remember playing at the age of, well, 2. And I have sunk hundreds, if not possibly thousands of hours into the sequel that acted as my starting point in the gaming as a whole. You became my gaming idol as a kid and I was obsessed. Sonic was so cool at how fast he was able to move. All those loops and springs that acted as a way to propel me forward in the zone. There was a golden orange fox that followed me wherever I went. The name Dr. Robotnik cemented itself into my psyche. And while Eggman is cool too, I kinda love that they made Eggman the nickname, but I don't care. Robotnik just feels greater to say, so fight me. Heh. But long story short, this game provided a lot of memories and a lot of good times. And no matter how hard life gets sometimes for me, Sonic 2 is one of those escapes for me. That traveled to the past to a time that was much simpler, where all that mattered was playing as a blue hedgehog who wore red and white shoes, with the speed that made it feel like I had the freedom to go anywhere and do anything I wanted in my favorite hobby. So today I'd like you to join me as I dissect the game that started it all for me, and see why after all these years, this was the game in the Genesis era that I always came back to more than any other title of its era. After the huge success of Sonic the Hedgehog, it only made sense that a sequel would be on the cards. And while yes, we did eventually get one, apparently the people in control of Sega of Japan at the time weren't too thrilled that the first title had taken so much time to develop. So with all the disagreements and politics, Yuji Naka, former head of Sonic Team, had actually quit and decided to try and find work elsewhere at this point. On the West Coast though, a man named Mark Cerny, who had found success in the title Marble Madness, was hired by Sega to create a new studio for the Sega Technical Institute, who would become known for such titles as The Ooze, Kid Chameleon, and Comic Zone. The goal of this new studio was to find and hire upcoming talented individuals where they could teach them about the gaming development industry, so not only were they to scout potential talent from the States, but Japan as well. Mark would go on to recruit Hirokazu Yasuhara during the development of Sonic 1, who was the director of that project at the time that flew out after his part of the development of Sonic 1 was done. And once Mark found out that Yuji had recently quit the company, he quickly did everything he could to persuade Mr. Naka to come to America and become a part of his venture, promising a bigger salary and more executive power. And with that, Yuji Naka was once again working for Sega. At the time, the STI team had Kid Chameleon under their belt, but once they had Mr. Naka and Mr. Yasuhara, two of the three main people who were behind the success of the first game, plus a handful of other Japanese staff members, Mark was sure that Sega would give them the okay to develop a sequel to Sega's biggest franchise, as he felt it would make the most sense to devote the entire studio for such a project. I'd managed to reunite two of the three key Sonic team members at my Sega Technical Institute. They were ready to start work on their next project, and so I asked marketing the obvious question, would you like another Sonic? Bizarrely, the response was, and again, I kid you not, no, it's much too soon. So we found another game to make, and in November, as we were getting started, marketing came back and said, oops, we do need that game, and we need it now. So the team lost 2 months out of an 11-month schedule. Okay, we really need to talk about this part, cause what the sweet flying fuck? I'm honestly really curious to know what corporate's mindset at the time was where they felt a sequel to your new breakout successful IP wasn't top priority. You read these kind of things and the more you realize that the heads at Sega have always been kind of major jackasses more times than not. And it makes you think just how lucky they were to have fallen ass backwards into this blue hedgehog. No wonder Yuji Naka quit back then, this is so unreal. But anyway, with them finally given the go to develop this highly anticipated sequel, the team was planning on making something epic, an 18-zone epic to be exact, where they would revisit tropes that the first game provided, and putting their own spirit on traditional levels such as desert and snow zones, along with ideas that hadn't been done before. Alongside that, one of Yuji Naka's first requests was to include a 2-player mode, something he originally wanted to include in the first game, but due to time constraints had to be abandoned at the time. But now he was allowed to have that chance. So with a 2-player mode in mind, that would mean they would have to create a new character to be be utilized for such a mode. So once again, an internal contest was held to help develop a new character. With that being said though, there was always the intention of including a brand new character, regardless of a 2-player mode. And in the end, the person who ended up winning the contest would be Yasushi Yamaguchi, with his creation of a 2-tailed fox named Miles per Hour. Though while the team loved the design, the name wasn't as well received, feeling that they should have just called him Tails so that it would fit with the simplicity of Sonic's name. In the end though, Yamaguchi wasn't satisfied with the result, would end up sneaking his original name into the concept art in some of the stages. So in the end, Tails would become his nickname. And to be honest, I think this was a good move in the long run. I mean, maybe it's just me because I'm so used to it, but Tails the Fox just doesn't have the same ring to it as Miles per Hour has by itself. So to have it be his nickname, it's kind of the best of both worlds. Of course though, as we see in the final product, many of the zones would end up being scrapped due to deadlines, and there was also talks about having time travel in the game, but with another looming deadline, Christmas 1992, time travel was dropped almost immediately, and levels like Sand Shower and a winter version were some of the first to go, sadly. This merging of American and Japanese employees for the Sonic 2 team apparently wasn't the smoothest. While they did the best they could to coexist, apparently it was a bit of a clusterfuck at points. Meetings for the direction of the game were held entirely in Japanese, with Cerny being the only one on the American side to speak fluent Japanese. Not to mention, some of the team was unable to get along with Yuji Naka's intense personality. But there were also cultural differences, such as the American side of the team used to a 9-to-5 job approach, whereas the Japanese side of the team were more used to working for hours on end, usually during the night, with members like Yamaguchi and Yasuhara being extremely passionate with the quality as a whole, as detailed by Tom Payne. Well, for me, this was my first job, so I only had Sonic 1 to go by and try and make it match that style. I'd say that it was Yamaguchi who laid out the look. He would stay all night and fix everything we did wrong. Quite an amazing fellow. But despite the butting heads at points and the tensions flaring between leaders wanting perfection, and despite the eventual content that had to be cut, Sonic 2's development did not slow down. Partially because Sega wanted to advertise the game as much as possible in as many different ways as possible. I swear this commercial practically sums up that approach flawlessly. Yet despite it all, Sonic 2 was released in North America and Europe on November 24th, 1992, dubbed Sonic's Tuesday, with Japan getting it a couple days earlier, and would go on to be the second best-selling Genesis game, second only to Sonic 1 itself. Again, a pretty interesting backstory. I didn't go into every little detail because there's a lot. So many beta elements for this game too, and thanks to said beta builds being leaked out decades ago, hell, some even before the game even launched, a good amount of it has been documented quite well. So if you want a more in-depth read on this stuff, Sonic Retro's coverage of it will be a good read, as it's quite awesome to check out. The Sonic 2 team managed to do quite a lot in such a short period, and it's a shame that not all of it was allowed to be fully utilized, though it's still surprising to see that we got a majority of it, considering that they lost 2 months of development time. Now normally I would check out the manual for some extra goodies and insight for more of a brief story summary, but admittedly the North American version doesn't really do a good job of it. It just talks about Tails idolizing Sonic ever since he was really young, which wasn't the little fox only 4 back then? Like, how much younger was he when he first met him? Was Sonic changing his diapers or something? Anyway, and then immediately jumps to what Robotnik is doing. So we're gonna check out the summary of, I assume, the Japanese version that's been translated by the fine people at Sonic Retro. And again, is gonna be my main source for a lot of this marathon in terms of history and little tidbits. If you're into Sonic lore or history, there's probably no better site than here to look up, at least as far as I'm aware. But anyway, after the defeat of Dr. Robotnik, Sonic, after feeling restless and wanting to go on a new adventure, kickstarts his plane, the Tornado, and decides to land on an island called West Side Island. Little did Sonic know that his past would come back to haunt him, as West Side Island has a legend that would connect what happened with the 6 Chaos Emeralds and his battle to get him before Robotnik could utilize them for world domination back on South Island not too long ago. As essentially, this is where the Chaos Emeralds originated from. A few days after landing, Sonic had noticed that something was following him. He would soon recognize it as a young fox, who would shy away and hide whenever Sonic looked his way. Not thinking much of it, he would continue to run off while the young fox would follow. This little guy was named Miles per Hour, but had inherited the nickname Tails due to his technical deformity in having 2 tails, and was often ridiculed and picked on for it. After seeing Sonic for the first time, Tails began to idolize him and started to imitate his new role model, hoping to become just as cool and confident as him. So he decided to follow Sonic wherever he went, and soon Sonic would accept Tails and let him tag along. Unfortunately, Tails wasn't the only one who had been trailing Sonic. Unbeknown to him, Dr. Robotnik had decided to follow Sonic to West Side Island, unintentionally leading him straight to the source of the origin of the Chaos Emeralds. Learning that not only were there 6 stones, but 7 of them, and if all of them were collected, they could produce a tremendous power source. And Robotnik wanted to harness the 7 Chaos Emeralds to power his new creation, the Death Egg. A flying fortress that had the potential to be one of his greatest weapons. So the evil genius began to plan and prepare to take care of Sonic, the one being that foiled his plans many times before. One day, Sonic would decide to take a nap on his Tornado, with Tails close by getting to take a look at it for the first time, excitedly deeply admiring the machine. Not long after, a loud explosion would occur, shaking the island violently and waking the blue hedgehog up. Off in the distance of Emerald Hill, Sonic could see a huge pillar of fire alongside a huge wave of robots. Knowing that it couldn't be anyone else but Dr. Robotnik behind this event, Sonic quickly takes off to stop him once more with Tails following behind, ready to help his hero out in any way he can. So yeah, like I said before, I normally don't go that far into story elements with games, but much like with Sonic 1, there aren't any story elements to let you know what's going on until the end of the game. You just start. And again, nothing wrong with that, it's straight to the point and I like that. But I think it is kinda cool to see what the intro is actually like. I didn't know much about Sonic 2's plot other than Robotnik's an ass, so kill him in his death egg, and that Tails was picked on for having 2 tails. So I find it an interesting little plot. It's essentially more of the same, just on a different island, but it gives a good idea of what Tails is like and why he's a part of this adventure. He's probably one of, if not the biggest highlight for this game in terms of what he provided for the series. Not only was his concept and design creative and top-notch, like seriously, a fox who can fly like a helicopter using his tails is pretty damn creative for its time. Though, was this just another Goku ripoff? I don't know, and this one's kinda harder to tell, but I figured I'd just bring it up. But anyway, he was also the gateway towards 2 players for the series. And while I'm jumping ahead a bit here, would go on to become the easy mode for many of the entries he's playable in. He truly is a great addition to help things feel fresh in Sonic 2, since a lot of stuff you did in Sonic 1 comes back for its sequel. The goal once again is to guide Sonic and Tails through different zones, trying to build up speed and momentum to be able to blast through them as quickly as possible, all the while destroying badniks to save the little critters trapped inside. All of the power-up monitors make a return and function the same way. So there's a lot of familiarity here so that veterans of the original will be able to jump right in with no difficulty. But for every familiar element, there was something new or some change to the formula. In terms of control, Sonic is still very much the blue sphere that only uses the D-pad, and one button for his actions like jumping. But he has been given a new technique that would become synonymous in the series design, and a core mechanic for years, the spin dash. As we all know, when you hold down the D-pad to make Sonic crouch, pushing the action button will make Sonic spin in place, and the more you rev him up, the more powerful the spin dash will be and will rocket him forward. Now, I just got done complimenting the hell out of Tails and what he brought to the series, but really the spin dash rivals him when it comes to importance for the series. You could probably see in the previous episode where I spin dash accidentally. He's not supposed to do that normally since Sonic didn't know that move yet in that game. That's how integral the spin dash became, where I can't even picture him without it in a 2D game, as it offers so much flexibility for the player to move around. In Sonic 1, if you wanted to make it up certain slopes or ramps, you can only do so if Sonic had enough speed to help him run up it before his momentum dropped, or else you dropped. If this happened, you were usually forced to backtrack for a bit so you had enough distance to try again. Same idea when you made him roll. If you wanted the most distance and effectiveness, you were stopping to go back to get that distance. The spin dash essentially cuts out the middleman here, and once you get a handle on it, which I mean it's not that hard, it can be used in ways to help you reach places or perform acts that you can only dream of doing before. The next major change is the levels and its act structure. This time around, most of the zones are only 2 acts each, and in my opinion, the series is better for it when it follows this structure. For me, the 3-act structure unfortunately makes levels overstay their welcome. Not where it's a detriment, but doing a 2-act structure gives off the feeling that things are progressing faster, and it helps keep things fresh so that a theme doesn't feel like it's dragging on or overstaying its welcome. In terms of actual level design, Sonic and Tails don't have a speed limiter this time around, so they are capable of going even faster than Sonic did in the original. So that means the level design has to compensate for that potential speed, and Sonic 2 nailed it in this department, I feel. Just about every level has a great balance between allowing you to pick up speed, but with platforming segments that feel organic to the level. This aspect of Sonic 2 also complements the spin dash that we were talking about, since some of these set pieces were made with it in mind. But still, there's rarely a time where you can't get by just on momentum alone. And it shows because these levels are designed to keep you moving. Then it's more to show off one of the level's set pieces. Linearity does vary from level to level, but the majority of these stages are so much bigger too. The only real exception that comes to mind is Emerald Hill Zone, but I give that one a pass since while yeah, both acts are pretty linear, with there only really being 2 major pathways, but you can tell this level is designed with the intention of, oh, you thought Sonic could go fast in the first game? Well, you haven't seen anything yet. But giving it a pass or not, Emerald Hill is still weaker than Green Hill no matter how you slice it. Last time I said I'm one of those people who enjoys Adventure 2 and Advance 2, as while they are linear in comparison to their first game counterparts, they do allow you to reach those blazing speeds if you're skilled enough. Well, Green Hill still lets you achieve that, and it was still explorable, and really as future versions showed, when Sonic has access to what he has in Sonic 2, then he's quite capable of achieving what he could in Emerald Hill, but has more pathway and options here. So yeah, I mean for Green Hill 2.0, it's a step back. Though I do like these corkscrews, and coconuts can go to fucking hell. 25 plus years later and I still get anxious around this little guy since I always manage to get nailed by his thrown coconut. And at the beginning of Act 2, like clockwork, I almost always smash into him here. I mean, I should know better and just stop using that stupid spring, but I've done it so many times now that I almost feel naked if I don't collect that patch of rings, then lose them all to this little bastard. There's definitely something wrong with me if I keep doing this. But dipshitness aside, if there's one thing I can compliment the Badniks for is that each zone has their own specific set of enemies with their own actions this time around. Last time, there was only like 6 to 9 different Badniks that were reused in different levels. Now, each zone has specific Badniks, each with their own movements and attacks. Obviously, some are based on the enemies from Sonic 1, but outside of the Buzz Bomber and Chomper-like Badniks, they're either completely new, or they're doing different stuff. I appreciate little things like this so much because not only does it give the game more variety, they also make these zones feel more distinct from each other. It keeps you guessing, since each has its own tactics. Some are bigger dickheads than others, but I appreciate this attention to detail. Cause in older games like this, one of the appeals of reaching the next level was just seeing what the level was and how it was different from the previous one. It was almost like a reward in and of itself. That's why in some games, when it's basically the same themes over and over, it can get a little boring after a while if the level design isn't interesting. Now, something you should learn pretty quickly is that star posts have received a pretty big upgrade in terms of importance. Not only are they used as checkpoints like before, they are now used as your access points for the special stage if you once again have 50 rings when you run past one. This is a significant improvement in handling how Sonic can access the special stages. It never should the series ever go back to the way Sonic 1 did it, Sonic 4, fuckheads. But why is it better? Well, simply because you're given more chances for each star post to act as a gate. Having to hold on to 50 rings when you reach the end of the act was a pain in the ass in some levels. Not to mention, even if you did get to the end with 50 rings, you only had a few seconds to actually jump into the ring. Guaranteed anyone who's played that experienced it at least once or twice where you didn't jump into it in time, so Sonic just ignores it and runs off. Oh, I fucking hate that shit with a bloody passion when it happens. It's infuriating. So it's nice not having to deal with that anymore. Well, except if you run away too far after you hit one, and then it kind of disappears automatically on you. A little annoying, but better than what it was. It's just nice to have more chances to access the special stage in general, as it makes getting the Chaos Emeralds in this game a lot more viable. But let's get this part over and done with, because Sonic 2's special stages are probably one of the most infamous in the entire series for a couple of reasons. First off, much like Green Hill, Sega and Sonic Team tend to not know when to just stop with the half-pipe. I at least get it since Green Hill has always been viewed as a good zone. Its reputation isn't a good one. Many people tend to just straight up hate the half-pipe, and that's mainly because some of these stages can feel impossible. Unlike Sonic 1 where the goal is to navigate through these rotating labyrinths, which honestly feels awkward as hell and unresponsive control-wise at points. But they all felt doable if you forget that you only had a few chances to nab one in comparison to Sonic 2. Again, the special exclusive 7th Emerald in the mobile port can go fuck its hat. Last time I'm gonna bring it up, but go fuck yourself. Sonic 2's version relies more on memorization and reflexes, as you try to collect the rings that come flying towards you while dodging the bombs. In concept, I honestly really enjoy the half-pipe. To me, I think when a stage is fair and it's challenged, then it's pretty fun. And for the first 3 or 4 emeralds, you should be able to get them pretty easy enough on your first or second attempt. But to me, the breaking point in the hard, and I mean fuck me hard difficulty spike, is when you're going for the 5th emerald. Jesus Christ, man, this Chaos Emerald is hell to get when you're learning the layout. So you've got to be on the ball here, or else you're going to see that not enough ring sign over and over and over, and go fuck yourself, Tails, you little shit. And that right there is why the half-pipe gets more flack than it should. As I mentioned earlier, Tails was a great addition that helped keep things feeling a little bit more fresh for one-player mode. He will mirror Sonic's movements. If you move forward, then Tails will move forward, and if you jump, Tails will jump right after. It's an interesting mechanic since Tails can't always keep up to copy you one-to-one, so you can potentially use it to your benefit when he has a happy accident that helps you out in killing a badnik, or helping out in hitting Dr. Robotnik. But sometimes he might not be so happy of an accident. Yeah, so just like in the main game, Tails will copy Sonic's movement in the special stages too. And you can also collect rings to help out with that total. On paper, that's not a bad idea. The developers also decided that since 2 characters are being able to collect rings, they felt it was necessary to increase the ring requirement to beat these stages. It's quite an impressive attention to detail back then, since I'm sure most other developers would have overlooked such a thing. And it makes sense because one of Tails' defining features in the one-player mode is that player 2 can take control of him at any time. And this was no overlooked feature. Tails is virtually impossible to all damage except crush damage and bottomless pits. If he gets lost off screen, he'll shortly fly back to you so you can resume playing as him, and he can't break item monitors. It's essentially a little brother or sister mechanic. Co-op wasn't anything new by this point, as there was plenty of games that had it, but Sonic isn't one of those games where co-op can function properly on one screen. Sonic 4 Episode 2 tried to do it, but just like here, all it ever ends up being is one person doing all the work, with player 2 barely able to keep up, or stay on the screen for that matter. If co-op was what they were trying to do, then they failed miserably. But I don't think that's what they were going for here, considering late in the game, Tails can't even be controlled. No, what Tails offered here was a way to let someone young think they were playing, without actually getting in the way, usually. And it amazes me that more games didn't do this more often back then. Though the idea of Tails following Sonic does make me laugh a bit when he isn't controlled by a human. Like, this little fox is supposed to rival Robotnik in terms of intelligence, yet when a computer has a hold of him, it really does feel like a 2-year-old is controlling him. He's a super genius, but runs around and gets killed like a dumbass all the time. It's very surreal when you think about it like that. But if there's one place where Tails can feel like Sonic's equal in single player, then that is the special stages. I mean, hey, if you have a competent partner who knows what they're doing, then yeah, the last 3 Chaos Emeralds are probably a hell of a lot easier, where the higher ring requirement makes a lot more sense. But I've got a question for you. When's the last time you played Sonic 2 special stages with a friend legitimately, and how often? And no, competitive version does not count. Guarantee that answer is never, or only once or twice with most people. So what does that leave for the rest of us? An AI that is programmed to follow your movements no matter what is coming. Can you see how that higher ring requirement isn't such a good idea anymore? I bet you in most cases if you lost to these stages, Tails was probably the reason. I don't know how many times I've had it where I've had enough to win, only for Tails to smack into a set of bombs, then knock my total under the amount needed, robbing me of that emerald. Now, some of you may say, well, you shouldn't be relying on Tails in the first place, and normally I would agree, but when the game is compensating for him by increasing the amount needed to win, how can I feel like it's not out of my control at points? I'm doing everything I can just to make sure I'm collecting enough and staying out of trouble, but with Tails being a dunce and the game making it harder because there is a second character, it's like a double whammy. The irony in this attention to detail is that they should have just left it well enough alone. Because when you're playing as Sonic or Tails alone, I find it to be a lot more manageable, since the ring count is slightly lower. Still not a cakewalk by any means. Emerald 5 and 6 still take me a few tries when I haven't played in a while. But when you ditch Tails, I can at least say it's possible. And I don't mind it this way. Certainly not the worst in the series when played like this. In fact, it's actually kind of enjoyable when it is. But it's clear the team knew they fucked up here, because when you can play as Knuckles, his ring requirement is even lower, making these stages even more doable. Like, really the biggest issue was the amount needed to win these special stages. So I guess that's all I'll say about that. Now, for this version you're saying, maybe it's just experience at this point, but I was able to get the emeralds for these characters very easily after I got a handle on the new 3D and faster frame rate, I think. I can't tell for sure, but it did feel a lot easier than the older versions. But I don't know if that was just my head or not, so I guess I'll leave that up to you guys to figure out. Despite the difficulty though, if you can't manage to pull it off and collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you'll be given one of the best rewards in all of gaming. The ability to plagiarize and turn into Super Sonic, where all of his attributes are increased tenfold. Okay, inspired by the Super Saiyan form. I know if I don't make that clear, I'll never hear the end of it. Calm down your keyboards. Super Sonic has invincibility, a higher jump, and a faster top speed and acceleration, all at the cost of 1 ring per second after collecting 50 beforehand. So while yes, it's obvious it's a broken power-up in itself, but in terms of game design, it's balanced pretty damn well with the ring timer. And with the fact that while yes, he's faster, Sonic's also harder to control, so it's not necessarily push a button to win instantly mechanic. Now, if you collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds as Tails alone, well, get fucked, Tails. Like, seriously, as great as a contribution Tails was for the series in various ways, he absolutely gets the shaft in some regards, especially in this game. There's sadly no benefit to playing as Tails in the base version of Sonic 2. You can't fly as him and you can't turn super. The only advantage the little guy has over Sonic here is that he is technically a couple pixels shorter than the blue Hedgehog, so he can squeeze into spots that would crush Sonic otherwise. It's honestly a shame because one of the coolest things about Tails is that it's clearly shown that he can fly, and it would have been a great incentive to encourage players to want to play as Tails for more than just a novelty as playing as a different sprite. They did give him the ability to fly in the mobile port, so winning, I guess. I mean, they might have excluded so they could keep the versus mode balanced, since Tails would have an advantage over Sonic since he could just fly past so many of the obstacles, but even then I don't think it would have broken the mode. Sure, the mode is all about racing each other to the end of these zones, but Sonic 2 was very ahead of its time for this type of mode since being the fastest didn't always mean victory. Hell no. That was only 1/5 of the criteria of winning the round. Versus takes into consideration like rings, badniks killed, item monitors open, and points alongside who finishes the quickest. Like, really think about that. When's the last time points in a Sonic game mattered that wasn't linked to a ranking system, or giving you a continue or a free life? Also, hell, the special stages here honestly feel like they were made for competitive play. You have exclusive stages here that are all about competing for the most rings, and oh my god, constantly trying to stay in front of your opponent is insane. It just never stops. I may have my reservations about the special stages in terms of actually getting the Chaos Emeralds, even though I think the hate is still overblown at points. But in terms of competition, I think it's one of the best experiences you can have with friends. It's so fierce and such a rush. The only downside for Sonic 2's versus modes, besides not having all the stages, is that the frame rate can shit the bed hard in this mode, unfortunately. Some may not have liked the flattened double screens either, but that never bothered me. And while the frame rate problem does suck pretty hard at points, I was still able to have a good time here and spend many hours playing it with my brothers when I was younger. And really, in my opinion, it was pretty much the best 2-player competitive mode the series would have until Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. It's not perfect, but clearly there was something there if Sonic Mania borrowed from it for its multiplayer mode. Oh, and one last thing about the special stages. Them robbing all of your rings after a round is kinda bullshit. And depending on the level and star post, it could put you in a bad situation like at the end of Mystic Caves where it'll force you into a boss fight with no rings. Granted, it's not that hard if you have a bit of patience, so it's not really an issue, but still, dirty pricks. But But speaking of bosses, Emerald Hill's boss. Who honestly thought this was okay? He does nothing but drives back and forth. I mean, I know the ball and chain wasn't any spectacular or required much thought, but at least he still tried to attack you. Like seriously, if you get hit here, I'll fucking slap you. So, next up is Chemical Plant, and this is the standout level for Sonic 2. Not to mention, it's easily the most iconic zone in the series when you take Green Hill out of the equation, and there's a reason for it. It's one of the best examples that showed what Sonic 2 is all about, and that is refinement. This level is huge, with multiple paths, interesting gimmicks like the tube and underwater segments, and truly shows just how fast Sonic can go in this game. There's plenty of times here where it feels like Sonic is going to go flying off the screen, and it always feels so awesome to experience that, and is a big reason why Chemical Plant lives up to its reputation. There is also one pretty infamous part that is nearing the end of Act 2 where the chemical water starts to rise, and you have to get out quickly or else you'll drown since there are no air bubbles here. Some people tend to find it tricky, but I don't know. Even as a kid, I don't remember ever really having a problem here. If anything, I usually screwed up here more and mistimed my jump and plummeted down to the bottom. And I mean, if that's what people were referring to, then sure, I'll definitely understand that since it's a mad slow dash otherwise. But as I've learned over the years, if that happens, a well-timed spin dash and jump will completely negate this hazard. Again, that spin dash opens up so much more flexibility for the series. But I think this level is special simply because of how open it is. Like, look at here. I didn't even know about the secret passage until a couple years ago. It's stuff like this on top of great level design and music, which is why I always gravitate towards 2D Sonic more than I will 2D Mario. And again, I do really like 2D Mario, but there's just something about 2D Sonic that really jives with me. And playing through Chemical Plant Zone really drives home that point. Robotnik is a bit of a sour spot though, and falls under that category being able to essentially one-shot him since you can constantly bounce on him until he explodes. The only way you're dying is if you're unlucky enough to fall into the abyss. Keep in mind this is going to be a bit of a recurring theme with him this time around, sadly, minus the abyss part. So Aquatic Ruins is one of those zones where I appreciate the concept behind it, but its execution sucks. This is pretty much the water level for Sonic 2 as the hazard won't appear again after this. Minus one act, but we'll get into it. The idea is that there's an upper path and a lower path. In a way, it does teach the player that usually you're going to want to stick to the higher paths when you can, since it's usually going to reward you for doing so, and that you want to avoid the lower paths because they usually suck. Well, if you do have to go through the lower path in Aquatic Ruins, then you're dealing with water and all the traits that come with it. Oh no, a pretty big penalty since you have to deal with the water physics, potentially drowning, and movement is a lot slower. Again, an interesting concept on paper, but when it comes to execution, it's crap cause when the hell are you ever gonna have to deal with the aquatics of Aquatic Ruins without actively choosing to go down there? You're only ever experiencing the water portion as if you're intentionally wanting to explore it. And who is actually gonna take the slower portion on purpose, outside of curiosity? Plus, with the spin dash, it's nowhere near as nerve-wracking as the underwater portions from Labyrinth Zone are. What's the most that'll happen here? You'll spin dash and maybe get crushed by a pillar? Big deal. Hell, depending on your last checkpoint, it might send you back before you were in the water. Because of this, I don't really view Aquatic Ruins as a water level. There's never a time where you're forced to have to deal with it. Some people may enjoy that aspect about this zone, but to me, I'd feel more rewarded if it took some actual skill to stay out of the water. It's pretty bad when this section of Chemical Plant has probably claimed more lives than any other section of Aquatic Ruins. But I don't know, maybe that's just me. Who knows? I feel this is what the team was aiming for with this level, but you done fucked up if that's true. That aside though, this is pretty similar to Emerald Hill. For the most part, you're always going forward, and even on land, there's not a lot of branching paths. There's like maybe one or two per act. So you will be reaching Robotnik pretty quickly in this zone. Now, if there's one thing this level will teach you, is that if you can roll into a ball and still be able to go fast while doing so, then in most cases, you should do it. Because the grounder enemies love to watch Sonic run straight into them and get hurt. It's a good habit to develop since rolling into a ball will save you a lot of headache. Just be mindful of your surroundings as it can backfire sometimes. The boss fight here is one of the more dynamic fights. Two totem pillars will rise from the ground, and Robotnik will hit him to shoot out arrows that can be used to stand on to get on top so you can actually reach him. The only thing is you can cheese it right at the beginning and jump on the top right away, and it breaks the fight right in half from the get-go. Though I will compliment the iOS port. This version had to compensate for the widescreen support, so the poles are actually farther apart, which makes attempting to attack Eggman a bit trickier since you're more likely to fall back into the pit. It's a pretty interesting yet unintentional improvement to this boss fight. Casino Night Zone. The zone itself might not come back as often as others, but oh, does its tropes and gimmicks certainly do. It straight up became the blueprint for all pinball and casino-like levels. It's a very gimmicky level as it's honestly hard to die here, let alone get hurt. There's barely any spikes or damaging terrain, there's never a time you should be out of rings thanks to the slot machines, and even if you are, there's only one enemy type in the zone and is so infrequent that it wouldn't matter anyway. Not to mention, even if you get the Robotnik payout on the slots, you're just gonna jump back in and get your ring backs anyway. The only way you're actually gonna probably die in Casino Night is if you manage to get one of the the blue boxes to accidentally crush you, or if you do indeed die to the boss. And to me, either situations are pretty rare if you have a little bit of patience. But yeah, either way, this isn't a hard level. It's pretty open though, which I appreciate, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't like the pinball mechanics. But the mechanics kind of fascinate me in a way too. Not because it's a weird or strange concept for a zone. I mean, hell, only in the Sonic series would these flippers, bumpers, and launchers would make sense in a platformer. But it's because this is probably the only time where people are okay with having the control taken away from them somewhat. And considering how touchy people are with the control and physics in this series, that's kind of saying a lot. But when it works, and these pinball mechanics are awesome. And I love how they incorporated them into Casino Night's boss fight. Robotnik's mech this time around will fly around near the top of your screen, dropping bombs, and if you go under him, he'll drop down to try and claw you. What makes this fight, in my opinion, the best boss fight in the base game is because you'll be using those flippers and bumpers you've been playing around with and learning from to attack him. Or you can use the momentum of the slopes to bounce into him. It really feels like such an organic approach towards defeating him. And it's kind of weird since no other fight in this game actually does this. Hell, even in future games, they rarely utilize level tropes with the design for boss fights. So nothing but good things to say here. But now we're on to Hilltop Zone, and from what I can tell, this zone doesn't have the best reception. From what I can tell, many seem to view it as a slower feeling level with a bit of stop and go. That and it feels too similar to Emerald Hill Zone since it reuses assets that are just colored blue. And I can see why. It has parts that can get the speed going, but there is a lot of sections that'll stop the player in their tracks to force them to just play the waiting game for seconds at a time, like these levers, or the ground and lava rising segments that could potentially force you to stop. I think another factor of this feeling of the zone feeling slow and dull is really having the level just be a blue version of Emerald Hill, cause it gives off a more cold and calm feeling. And mixing that with Hilltop's slower paced music, it just feels slow. It might not be for the majority of it, but it is the feeling. I don't hate this zone, but it's kind of like Marble Zone, I just don't feel anything towards it. I will give it this though. I do appreciate the dev team having enough foresight to include these breakable stones here throughout the level. At first it may feel like a pace breaker since you're usually running into one, but you ever notice they always seem to be placed just before you reach one of these guys or lava? Now while not all of them apply to this, but those blocks are there to serve as a way to make sure the player isn't careening into hazards left and right. Some may say, well, that's a reflection on poor level design, and hey, you might be right, but to me, it's a nice attention to detail to help benefit players so that we don't get punished for wanting to do what Sonic is known for. The boss fight though, holy fuck, how do we go from this back to one-shotting the guy? If you get hit, then it's only because you fell into the lava. Like Chemical Plant, it's over before you know it, but bonus! No bottomless pit to at least give off the illusion of tension. So that kinda sucks. It's actually one of the worst boss fights if you don't count the first one. Ugh. Let's move on to something a lot better. And this is a zone I'm shocked that has never made a comeback, cause to me, it's one of the game's best and unique looking zones in all of Sonic actually, for that matter. The Mystic Cave Zone. Musically, I love this track. It's got the twang, and it has that upbeat but creepish tone to it. Something that would fit perfectly in something Halloween themed, honestly. It's got decent speed sections and a good chunk of elements like pulley bridges, these swinging platforms, and these floating traits that make no sense. There's just a lot to take in for Mystic Caves. I also love the levels palette. The use of green, purple, and orange really makes this level pop in my opinion. Again, like I said, this is a very unique look for a zone that blows me away that hasn't even been used more for level tropes in future zones. But there's one huge problem with the second act, and anyone who plays knows exactly what I'm referring to. The spike pit that you could easily fall into and get stuck in and die. It's cheap, it comes out of nowhere, and deserves every bit of hatred it gets too, cause it's not like it was an accident. There are literally 2 more pits right after this. But unlike the first pit, the second and third provide ways of getting out and continuing forward, so what the fuck? Did someone piss in the level designer's Cheerios that day? Cause why? This is just malicious and it had to be intentional. Thankfully it's not something like the spinning barrel in Sonic 3, where it acts as a potential brick wall and literally made you wait and time out if you didn't know what to do. But Jesus Christ, this trap was just as mean-spirited. Thankfully Christian Whitehead fixed this in the mobile version, where now it acts as a secret passage to a scrap level called the Hidden Palace Zone. Like, talk about turning a negative into a positive, and paying a huge amount of fan service for a zone that became infamous for being one of the most well-known scrap levels for Sonic 2. The thing I really love about this update is because it introduces the idea of branching paths for zones. Just think about how much more exploration and replay value this could give the series. It's quite known that the upper path is usually the most rewarding in these games, so why not have it where alongside hidden passages, if you're skilled enough to keep up on the higher path, it'll lead to a zone separately from the bottom path. Knowing that each playthrough could be a different one each time you play, and not just going through different level paths each time, this is something that needs to be expanded upon and not let this just be a one-off thing, cause god damn, there's so much potential here, like, oh my god. The boss fight for Mystic Caves is a little bit more in-depth, since Robotnik will drill through the surface, causing debris and stalactites to fall, potentially harming Sonic. It's pretty creative though, not the game's fault, but it did lead to this style being overdone a bit over the years. But while you can't one-tap him like you could in other fights, it's still a pretty easy boss fight. But let's back up a little bit and go to the Hidden Palace zone. It's just a one-act zone that honestly is probably the coolest element that was added to the mobile port. If you were like me, then you messed around with the sound test as a little kid, and probably stumbled upon this one music track that you didn't hear in the game at all. You may have thought, where was this level? Yet you could never find it, but it was interesting. So to see the level associated to it come back was awesome. A shame they didn't use that track for it in the main version, but I guess they felt it was too slow for a music track like that. Either way, I have no complaints about the zone. I enjoyed its flow, I love the badniks here. It's cool to actually have a water section later on in the game again, although the fear of drowning is non-existent. And Robotnik's fight here is now the best in the game in my opinion, especially if you have the insta-shield on. Without it, it is kind of horrible though due to having to play the waiting game. Knuckles hates this boss fight due to his gimp jump. Still, I enjoy the concept, and it is one of the harder boss fights in the game, so I approve. I mean, anytime you have a boss fight that is actively avoiding your jump attack, that's kind of impressive for old school Sonic. Now on to Oil Ocean, and this zone is tied with Chemical Plant as my favorite zone in the game. I constantly go back and forth on which I like more, so I decided it's easier just to view them equally in terms of my favorite. So you can imagine how stoked I was when I found out that this was also returning for Sonic Mania. Not one, but both of my favorite zones are getting remixes? Hell yeah. I mean, I was already sold, but I was super sold when I saw that. I love this zone's concept, I love its music, its gimmicks, its colors, the way how the oil plays a factor in the progression, whether it's the slides, these parts where you can't spin dash, or the quicksand effect at the bottom showing that falling isn't a death sentence. These cannon-like things that'll send you flying, making the already abstract level design even more abstract since you'll be all over the place. Then being rewarded for doing these leap of faiths, and I can't get enough of Oil Ocean. With that being said though, I know I'm in the minority on this one. Oil Ocean, from what I've gathered, isn't too well liked by most. It is a slower level with these stop and go segments like the elevators or these manhole covers shooting you upwards. The fans can be a pain in the ass since they're almost always positioned in a way to hinder your progress, such as here where I had trouble getting back up. Or how about here where they pushed me into this prick, and because I was in the air, I couldn't collect any of my rings from that cheap fucking hit. Also, a lot of people think the Seahorse Badnik is cheap since they can follow you anywhere and spam their ink shots, though to be honest, I never really had an issue with them. Sure, they're annoying, but as long as you keep moving, they're not really a threat since you can run past them and not even think about it. And of course, this all caps off with another underwhelming boss fight, as you can not only cheese it just by staying under here and dodging all of Robotnik's attacks, although you don't even have to do that since these attacks are so easy to dodge in the first place. But here we go again, the Eggman fight here is once again one of those bop him on the head effortlessly multiple times. You might not be able to one-time him since he sinks back into oil before you can finish him off, but oh no, just gotta wait one extra turn. Though I'm sure you probably can one-time his ass, I'm just not good enough to do it. Almost 30 years later when I first touched this game and I still can't. But I never strive to be a speedrunner, I guess. So yeah, while it is one of my favorite levels to go through and explore, I'm not blind as to why some may view Oil Ocean as one of the lesser zones. But I know one thing's for sure, Metropolis Zone can be hell. This had to be Scrap Brain Zone 2.0, it just had to. But much like that torture pit of a zone was, Metropolis couldn't get enough of that last level syndrome either. Oh, and hey, let's for old time's sake go back to the 3-act structure, and let it drag on even further, cause the 2-act structure wasn't good enough. Now, I know the reason why the zone ended up being 3 acts instead of 2, and that's because the 3rd act was supposed to actually be meant for another zone called Cyber City, or more well known as Genocide City. What happened, I guess, was that they had the level layout for Genocide City pretty much all mapped and ready to go, and all they needed to do was design the actual art assets. But due to time constraints, they had to scrap it. So not wanting to throw out all that level progress, they felt it was just best to port it over and make it the 3rd act of Metropolis. So know that when you play Act 3, you're for the most part playing on Genocide City. So I don't blame the team for not wanting their work to go to waste, but this really shows why the 2-act structure was for the best. Cause on top of some of these acts being the longest in the game, by the end of Act 2, I'm just ready to move on. But it's like, nope, you still got another 3 to 5 minutes here left in this death trap. Either way, Metropolis does not need an introduction. It's gonna kick your ass and shit in your mouth for good measure, just because it can. The thing is though, it's not the level itself that's the problem. Quite the contrary. This is a really fast level. In fact, probably the fastest that doesn't rely on boosters or other such elements. There's plenty of chances to fly through this zone. The problem is, every time you feel like you're about to enjoy Metropolis, there's always an Astron, Slicer, or Shellcracker to meet you at the end of that path to ruin your day. Earlier when I had praised Hilltop for including those breakable stones for acting as a buffer to make sure you're not colliding with badniks and hazards left and right? They don't do that here. In fact, this zone loves to punish you for wanting to be skillful and keep that speed and momentum up. And it's all because of the dickheaded placement of these badniks. Probably the most infamous badnik in Sonic's entire series is the Slicers. Usually mixed in with Astrons, this game loves to put these little fuckers at the top of these screw segments. So that not only do you have to worry about these guys potentially exploding on you and having their spikes knock you off all the way down, and even to this day it always feels like I trigger them randomly, well except on the mobile port, as I found out that their trigger area is a hell of a lot bigger, making them much more deadly. Admittedly, a nice improvement since some never even went off in the older versions. But nonetheless, I've also got to worry about this prick's homing sights that are probably going to hit me no matter what I do. I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks this, but I think the absolute worst placement is the one above these set of bumpers. For years, I always half-assed this segment and just prayed I was lucky enough to avoid them, which was like never. Or I'd get hit in a way that somehow keeps me at the top instead of falling. Little did I know that if you hold down the jump button, Sonic will bounce off these pads even higher and completely clear this little bastard. When I first figured it out, it was like, are you fucking kidding me? I've been torturing myself over the past 20 years for nothing? You dickhead. But for as much shit slicers can dish out, honestly, I get more shit from the shell crackers. Even now, I still somehow get hit by this guy no matter what I do. It could look like I should have hit him, but sure enough, I always seem to be rewarded in seeing Sonic fly backwards. Also, they love sticking this guy in small corridors that are damn near impossible to get past without taking damage. Easily one of my most hated enemies in the entire series. Though another bonus of the iOS version is if you have the Insta-Shield on, it makes these crab meat knockoffs a hell of a lot more manageable. Also, a dishonorable shout out to these pistons that'll crush you, or here where these conveyor belts that sometimes like to impale you in spikes. This zone is one of the worst for punishing players for not knowing what's ahead. Now, to be fair, it gets nowhere near as bad as Scrap Brain when it comes to bullcrap hazards and such, and I fully understand that Metropolis is practically the final traditional zone before we get to the last 3 story-like levels. But this is 3 acts, each 2 to 5 minutes long. You guys could have toned down the cheapness a little bit. And again, it's a shame because on its own, outside of those couple insta-kill hazards, it's a great zone level design-wise that unfortunately shows what happens when you don't have good enemy placement. Well, at least Robotnik's fight is fun, even if it is simple. Here, he'll summon a balloon from one of his capsules each time you hit him. They don't offer any real threat since they're slow and die with one hit, but something is relaxing about popping these Eggman balloons, especially if you have access to Supersonic and can summon all of them at once. I don't know why I like popping them so much, but I do. But I do remember though, when I was extremely little, this fight giving me a lot of shit. For whatever reason, I could never time it right when I hit him, so I would get hit myself. So what I would end up doing is just taking control of Tails and let him tank the shots for me. I completely abused the system and broke this fight right in half, just like Tails is capable of the rest of the time, and I felt so sly for doing so back then. With that being said though, Metropolis music is I love this theme. It is so upbeat at first, actually pretty unfitting, but as it keeps going, it has those sharp sounds and its pacing is just so up there. It's always been one of my favorites to jam out to, though that's most of the soundtrack. Nakamura truly did outdo himself this time around. Just about every song is ingrained into my brain and I feel a little better every time I hear one. Even the multiplayer tracks, which, can we finally have a toggle for Emerald Hill and Casino Nights music? You already brought back the 2-player version of Mystic Caves music for Hidden Palace Zone, so why not these 2 as well? Or, ooh, bring back 2 more scrap levels for Sonic 2 in the Origins collection and use them there. Oh yeah, big brain moment right there. So after that, we're finally making it to the endgame, where now each zone is only 1 act each and we start off with Sky Chase. Another level that many don't seem to like since it's an auto-scrolling level where all you do is ride on the tornado as you make your way to Robotnik's flying fortress, all the while dodging or attacking his airborne badniks. Now, I'm honestly not trying to be the contrarian here like some may think I've been trying to do with zones like Labyrinth and Oil Ocean Zone, but I do actually like this level. Sure, it completely strips away all the mechanics that can make Sonic levels fun. It's extremely slow and feels like it can drag the pacing down. And there are spots where it feels like you're just waiting. And I completely get why people don't seem to like Sky Chase due to those reasons. But for me personally, I enjoy it because it's a change-up. A little 2-minute breather that breaks up the action for a bit. Granted, I think it can definitely be done better where I felt Mirage Saloon Act 1 and Mania had something going where you transition to the train for a bit. I think if they would have done that transition a couple times, it would have been a happy compromise for this stage. But even as is, there's just something about controlling the movement of the tornado and using the turtle badniks as platforms. And seeing Sonic 2 finally incorporating some show-don't-tell storytelling in its scenery, where they show a section of the Wing Fortress Zone appearing in the background, is a great touch. And the music track is so peaceful, it makes you feel so free here. This had to be a callback to Naoto Oshima's desire to have Sonic's fur blue, as alongside matching Sega's logo, also symbolized that hope that the open sky is forever blue. If this wasn't a callback to that symbolism, then that was quite the coincidence. To be honest though, and I'm sure many of you have done this too, but I've always viewed Sky Chase to the Death Egg as part of the same zone, since each is only 1 act long, and they all connect pretty fluently like what its sequels start doing later on. Maybe that's why I like it as much as I do. Maybe my appreciation for the storytelling aspect of these last 3 zones are what overshadow Sky Chase's flaws for me. Spotting that symbolism connection certainly helps. Either way, it's not an offensive act by any means. It's over before you can really start to hate it anyway, at least that's how I feel about it. And sadly, it's over for our little 2-tailed buddy as we are now approaching the Wing Fortress, and the first thing that happens is Robotnik being able to successfully shoot down the tornado, but not before Tails is able to get Sonic safely onto the gunship. Wing Fortress is probably my favorite zone after Chemical Plant and Oil Ocean Zone, and is truly a great final level that will test your skills that doesn't have to rely on the punishing bullshit Metropolis puts you through to do so. Well, maybe one part, but we'll get into that in a bit. It is one of the most linear levels in the game though, since for the most part it's pretty much just one path, as you make your way across the warship, doing your best not to fall off, since I'm sure a fall from this height would be kinda lethal. Flying Fortress does like its sections where missteps or mistimed jumps will be the end of you. This part, even to this day, still gives me anxiety every time I have to do it, since these platforms will retract, leaving you no room for error. And believe me, my butt cheeks are made of steel after this part every time I play. Only for this to happen. Kiss my ass, game. Remember that we'll get into it? Well, we're getting into it. Kiss my ass, you cheap ass fucking piece of goddamn Okay, obviously I'm sure this wasn't intentional, something that is thankfully fixed in this amazing mobile port. But what I hope was a glitch is that if you're holding forward on the D-pad, like just about what everyone would be doing, then it gimps your shot and you fall to your death like a dumbass. I don't care who you are, anyone who didn't have prior knowledge of this has fallen for this trap, and just like me, you felt robbed, cheated, dumbfounded, and just completely in that what the fuck, seriously type of mode. Thankfully they had enough mercy to have a checkpoint right before that drop, and it's the only real sour spot that I can think of for this entire zone. Well fuck, maybe it was intentional. If it was, like screw you developers. Now, despite its intention to be very linear, one of the things I love about Wing Fortress is just how broken it can be when it comes to unintentional shortcuts such as here. Though he should have probably died there. Or here, if you do take a hit, you can bypass a huge chunk of the level. Or hell, if you have access to Supersonic, this guy jumps so high he can bypass unreachable edges and just completely ignore any chance of falling to your death. It's like the one level in the series where you can Super Metroid the hell out of the act without having to do some extremely precise speedrunning strategies. It's very surreal, honestly. The boss fight here is simple in design, but pretty effective if you ask me, if not a little boring. Eggman sends out his laser beam to attack Sonic, alongside these 3 spiked platforms that are used as the only way to reach the laser and attack it. It's nothing too difficult, though sometimes I forget how easy it is to slip off these things, then have the bottom hit you. Also, what the hell is with this guy? Like seriously, just go to the bathroom. You know, I hear keeping it in is not good for the little peepee. Could be a medical emergency. So after he beat his laser beam, he fucks off to the shitter, and Sonic rightfully doesn't follow just yet. Gotta get that free man first. Then he jumps down to see that Robotnik is taken off for space. Thankfully, Tails shows up just in time to give Sonic a ride and make chase for the spaceship, allowing Sonic to jump on and hold on for dear life. Luckily, hedgehogs are immune to extreme cold or the vacuum of space, and safely makes it inside the Death Egg. And now it's the final hurdle, Eggman's base of operations, his greatest weapon, and we see virtually nothing of it. Yeah, looking back on it, it is kind of underwhelming for a final zone when you quickly realize that it isn't an act, but more so a mini boss rush. To be fair, at least it's not hiding the fact that it's not a real zone. One of the things I never liked in Sonic 4 Episode 2 was when you finally got to the Death Egg Mark II, they tried to pretend like it was a legit level by having you run long distances, but with no enemies or apparent dangers. It just felt like busy work until you reached the boss sections. They don't do that here, instead just getting straight to the fights, and I appreciate that at the very least. Now, much like the final act of Sonic 1, there are no rings here whatsoever, so we are once again in a situation where there's no room for error. And again, some people don't like this approach to the final bosses. If anything, some may feel it's more offensive here since there are 2 parts this time. But while I can understand that mindset, and respect it if you don't like the no ring approach, but for me, I like it here. Unlike Sonic 1, where the only real threat was honestly being crushed due to how easy it was to dodge the electric orbs, Silver Sonic and the Death Egg Robot are a little trickier to figure out. And even if you had rings, you weren't going to be able to just mindlessly and effortlessly bop him on the head like you could a good chunk of the other fights. Silver Sonic, you gotta be careful. Just like Sonic, he's got those spines on his back that'll hurt you if you jump on him. So you gotta consider that. Plus, one of the visual and audio cues that I love is when he does that whirring sound, signifying that yeah, don't be a jackass and jump on that part. It's a great little attention to detail that warns the player, and prevents a cheap death if you're smart enough to clue in. When it comes to Robot Sonics in the series, Silver Sonic is probably the most basic since he only has a couple of moves, such as his version of the Spin Dash, and his Rocket Propulsion move, and it's all done in a specific pattern. But sometimes basic is all you need to provide a threat since this isn't a fight you want to let drag on. And for a first timer, he probably will give you a run for your money. I remember as a kid this thing kicking my ass quite a few times until I got used to it. But I know what did kick my ass for like a good 6 to 7 years when growing up, which was after defeating Silver Sonic and chasing Robotnik for a bit, we finally make it to this beast, the Death Egg Robot. The one being that made me see that game over screen plenty of times, and being sent all the way back to the start, and I'm so glad I don't have to worry about shit like that anymore. If anything, I'd probably argue that this fight is on the better end of the spectrum for final boss fights in Sonic. Yes, he has a predictable pattern. Yeah, his moves are kind of basic as Robotnik just alternates between the same 2 actions each time, unless you're behind him. And of course, once you figure out his pattern, the fight becomes extremely easy. But really, what isn't once you got a fighter section figured out? But that's the key here for the Death Egg robot. It's not made apparent right away what his weak point actually is. And back then, I certainly didn't have a guide to walk me through it. You're not going to reach his head. And if you're like me, where at first glance, his body seems to be off limits too, since his spiked hands are in the way, as well as his footing half the time, which again, if you're like me, you got skewered or died off your first attempt. So you gotta experiment for that sweet spot. Normally I wouldn't like this and would be right there with people and calling foul with the no ring gimmick, but 2 things kept me from thinking that way and made me kind of appreciate it more. First off, the Death Egg robot is very slow. In most cases, you're only getting hit due to your own recklessness or mistimed jump or angle, so you're given plenty of time to just hang back and try and study his tactics and finding an opening. For example, when I was a kid, I never waited for him to shoot his fist, then hit him. I always waited for him to step back and then hit his underbelly. Certainly not the safest approach as I learned later on. Hell, it makes the fight so much longer since you're only doing 1 blow per cycle. And I mean, I would never recommend it now. But even at a young age, I developed a working tactic, and it's how I beat him the first time. A couple of years later, that tactic served me well when I had to come back to do this fight with Knuckles. You think this fight is too easy and predictable once you know what to do? Do it with Knuckles and see how well you do. Guaranteed, it's a hell of a lot harder thanks to his gimp jump. The other reason, honestly, yeah, it's a cheap tactic, but it's the final level. Not having rings gave it so much tension by doing this. It's mono a mono. You're fighting the Eggman's biggest creation yet, on a literal Death Star, where 1 wrong move and you'll be fatally wounded, at your own becoming on top of it. But you kept at it, whether you got it today or sometime later, you'll eventually topple the giant, and I'll never forget when I did it. I was either between the age of 8 or 9, and at that point it had been 6 to 7 years of defeat at the hand of the Death Egg robot. But it happened, and I saw the end cutscene and credits. The Death Egg robot collapsing and exploding, with Sonic escaping from the exploding Death Egg. Okay, like I know kids game here, but could you imagine if they allowed Robotnik to die here? What a brutal way to go. Even just being trapped in that exploding robot, then if you did get free of it, only to see your moon-sized spaceship start plummeting back to the surface? That'd be fucking traumatizing, dude, if you did somehow survive. But anyway, Sonic racing off as fast as he can, desperately avoiding the blast, knowing his only option is a leap of faith and plummet back to Earth. His only hope, a 2-tailed fox. Or you could just go super. Yeah, I much prefer Tails having to come in with the save. It just shows the bond and trust they have for each other that much better. But as Sonic approaches the exit of the Death Egg, you only see the screen go white, showing Tails getting ready to save his buddy once more, and then we watch him catch Sonic and they fly off with a final pose of victory, signifying that I finally beat the very first game I ever remember playing. That was a good day. Well, I did it. I just finished taking a more in-depth look at one of the most important games for me, and hopefully with not too much bias. But even with any potential bias, I can easily say Sonic 2 is in no way perfect. As I've discussed, there's plenty of flaws about this title, some more depending on who you ask. And while it does trip at points on its journey to refine and perfect what was established previously, it's still got a majority of that refinement down so goddamn well. Whether it's perfecting the control of Sonic to make it feel like he was a little bit better and a little bit faster, whether they were introducing new concepts like the Spin Dash or Supersonic, improving on the level design for the most part, even little things like music and a brighter palette with the colors of its zones, all led to Sonic 2 just feeling so much better. All of this led to a gaming icon sticking around for 30 years at this point. Sonic 2 is not only a good game, but it's an important game. Sonic 1 might have kickstarted the franchise, but Sonic 2 cemented that franchise into gaming culture, where the blue hedgehog is still relevant, or at the very least, he's still relevant to me, even after some of his bad blunders that would have killed any other franchise. And that's all due to the good faith games like Sonic 2 and its sequel has provided over the years. Sonic 2 is a great game, and one of the best in the series. But even if it wasn't, say hypothetically I came to the conclusion that this title did more wrong than good, or was flat out horrible. Well, I guess this is where my bias would probably show, but I don't care. It'd still be an important game to me even if I had to admit Sonic 2 wasn't good. It still would have provided thousands of hours of entertainment for me, and it still would have been that random game that I grew up playing that I would have developed a weird fondness for it. We all have a few titles like that, I think. Thankfully, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is a good game and I don't have to look back on it in that way. But I think I'm rambling at this point. Holy hell, this turned into a 50+ minute review. Another 15 to 20 minutes and I'd probably just be wrapping up another playthrough, so I'm gonna call it quits here. Join me next time as I dive into what may be considered the other Sonic 2, I guess. Yeah, it's gonna be Sonic CD this time, might as well go in order. I think this one will be interesting though, cause Sonic CD is easily my least played classic title, so I might not be so blind to it like I was with this one. But until then, you guys have a great day or night or whenever the hell you watch this, and I'll catch you next time.